The United States Navy is very, very good at some things. For instance, projecting power, sailing in straight lines, and making movies about volleyball look incredibly dramatic. But there is one thing it is spectacularly bad at: buying new ships. It's a problem. A big problem. Because for a Navy, not being able to buy ships is like a bakery not being able to buy flour. Sooner or later, you're just a weird-smelling room full of angry people in hats. For years, the Navy has been on a losing streak that would make even the Cleveland Browns feel a little bit better about themselves. They gave us the literal combat ship, a vessel so plagued with problems, it was basically a floating identity crisis. And let's not forget the Zumwalt-class destroyer, a stealth ship so expensive that the ammunition for its fancy guns cost $1 million a pop. $1 million for one shot. You could hire a team of Liam Neesons to personally deliver that shell for less. So, when the Navy announced a new frigate program, the Constellation-Class, everyone held their breath. This time, they said, would be different. This was the ship that would fix everything. It was meant to be the sensible, reliable Toyota Camry of warships after a decade of buying unworkable, gold-plated unicycles. The plan was simple, almost suspiciously so. The Navy wasn't going to design a new ship from scratch. No, they were going to take a proven design from our European allies, tweak it a little, and start building. It was supposed to be fast, cheap, and low risk, a guaranteed win, a procurement slam dunk, the kind of easy success story the Navy desperately needed to tell Congress, the taxpayers, and frankly, itself. The new ship was christened the FFGX program, which sounds less like a warship and more like a failed energy drink from the early 2000s. But the hope was real. This frigate would fill a critical gap, giving the Navy a capable multi-mission vessel that wasn't as ludicrously expensive as a destroyer. It would hunt submarines, shoot down missiles, and generally be a useful member of the fleet, unlike some of its predecessors which seemed designed primarily to generate embarrassing headlines and GAO reports. The promise was a fleet of tough modern frigates that would get to the sailors on time and on budget. It was a beautiful dream, a wonderful, shining, patriotic dream, and like most beautiful dreams, it was about to curdle into a waking nightmare of delays, cost overruns, and baffling decisions. Because this is the US Navy, and if there's one thing they love more than a good plan, it's taking that good plan, scribbling all over it with a red crayon, and setting it on fire. The story of the Constellation-Class Frigate isn't just a story about a ship. It's a story about an institution that seems fundamentally incapable of learning from its own mistakes. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when you keep asking for just one more thing until the entire project collapses under the weight of your own indecision. This wasn't a simple mistake, it was a slow-motion fiasco, a procurement disaster that everyone should have seen coming, mainly because it had happened so many times before. Get ready, because we are about to dive into the deep, murky waters of what went wrong. The core idea behind the Constellation program was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of spending a decade and a mountain of cash reinventing the wheel, the Navy would do something radical. It would copy someone else's homework. Specifically, they would use a parent design. This meant taking a ship that was already sailing for another friendly navy and adapting it for American use. It's the military equivalent of buying a floor model. You know it works, you can see it right there, and you don't have to wait for someone to figure out how to assemble it from a box of confusing parts and a manual written in bad Swedish. It was the procurement easy button, a way to skip the riskiest, most expensive parts of shipbuilding. The winning design was based on a ship called the Frem, a frigate jointly developed by France and Italy, and it's a good ship. The Italian version, which the Navy chose, is a proven, capable vessel that does exactly what a frigate is supposed to do. It's a solid, reliable piece of engineering. The plan was to keep the American version, the Constellation, as close to the original as possible. The Navy's own goal was to maintain about 85% design commonality. That means 85% of the ship would be exactly the same as the Italian one that was already happily floating in the Mediterranean. This was the key to the whole thing. By not changing the design, you could use existing blueprints, avoid unexpected engineering problems, and keep the production line moving quickly. This approach was supposed to exorcise the ghosts of past failures. The Literal Combat Ship, or LCS, was a cautionary tale. In starting from a blank sheet of paper, the Navy wanted a revolutionary ship with swappable mission modules, a concept that never really worked. The result was two different ship classes that were under a gunned mechanically unreliable and too fragile for a real fight. The Zumwalt destroyer was another custom-built disaster, a ship so advanced and so expensive that the Navy could only afford to build 3 of them, turning them into little more than floating technology demonstrators. The Constellation was meant to be the antidote to all that hubris. It was a humble admission that maybe, just maybe, our allies knew how to build a perfectly good ship. So, the contract was awarded to Fincantieri Marinette Marine, an American shipyard owned by the same Italian company that builds the Frem. The pieces were all in place for a massive success. A proven foreign design, a shipyard that already knew how to build it, a clear path to getting dozens of much-needed ships into the fleet without the usual drama. It was a plan so sensible, so logical, that for a moment it seemed like the Navy had finally turned a corner. It felt like watching a toddler who always throws his food suddenly start using a fork. You're proud, you're relieved, but deep down, you know it's only a matter of time before that fork ends up stuck in the wall, and there's spaghetti on the ceiling. So, the Navy had its simple, low-risk plan, and then, the Navy did what the Navy does best. It started to tinker. It began with just a few small requests. Could we make it a little more survivable? Someone probably asked in a meeting. And while we're at it, can we add this other weapons system? And maybe upgrade the radar? And it absolutely must have a more powerful engine. Each request seemed reasonable on its own. But taken together, they were like adding just one more wafer-thin mint to a project that was about to explode. The simple, elegant European frigate was slowly but surely being transformed into something else entirely. It was becoming a mini Burke, a scaled-down version of the Navy's mighty Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. The problem is, a frigate is not a destroyer. It's not supposed to be. A frigate is a smaller, more affordable ship designed for tasks like escorting convoys and hunting submarines. A destroyer is a capital ship, packed to the gills with missiles and advanced sensors, designed to fight and win major naval battles. Trying to cram all the capabilities of a destroyer into a frigate's hull is like trying to fit a V8 engine into a lawnmower. It's not only difficult and expensive, but it also ruins the lawnmower. The Navy's relentless push for more features, more armor and more weapons completely undermined the entire point of choosing a parent design in the first place. The list of changes grew and grew. The Navy demanded different steel for the hull to meet higher survivability standards. They wanted to replace the ship's electrical power system. They insisted on integrating the Aegis combat system, the same complex brain found on their destroyers and cruisers. They wanted more crew comforts, a different helicopter hangar, and a whole suite of American-made sensors and weapons that were never intended to be on the ship. Each change had a ripple effect, forcing engineers to redesign entire sections of the vessel. The engine room had to be stretched, the internal layout had to be completely reconfigured. The ship was no longer a slightly modified Fayram. It was a brand new, custom-built vessel that just happened to look a bit like a Fayram from a distance. This process is known in the business as requirements creep, and it is the silent killer of big government projects. It's death by 1,000 good ideas. The Navy wasn't trying to sabotage the program. They genuinely believed they were making the ship better, more capable, and more suited for the American fleet. But in their quest for the perfect ship, they created an impossible one. They had taken a simple, off-the-shelf solution and turned it into a complex, bespoke engineering nightmare. They had forgotten the most important lesson of the LCS and Zumwalt fiascos. Sometimes good enough is actually better than perfect, especially if perfect means it never gets built. The consequences of all these changes were, to put it mildly, catastrophic. The numbers tell a story so stark it's almost comical. Remember that goal of 85% design commonality with the Italian parent ship? That number plummeted. By the time the Navy was done with its wish list, the Constellation shared only 15% of its design with the original Frem. 15%. That's like claiming your custom-built hot rod is based on a Toyota because you used the original tire valve caps. The entire advantage of using a parent design had been completely erased. The Navy was now, for all intents and purposes, building a brand new, unproven ship from scratch, and it was paying the price. All those upgrades made the ship heavy, dangerously heavy. By mid-2024, engineers realized the design was already 759 tons overweight. That's the equivalent of strapping 4 blue whales to the deck. This extra weight caused a cascade of problems, impacting the ship's speed, range, and future upgrade potential. Meanwhile, the cost was spiraling out of control. The frigate that was supposed to be a cheap alternative to a destroyer was now projected to cost $1.5 billion per ship. For context, that's about 80% of the cost of a full-size destroyer. Yet for that price, the Navy was getting a ship with only about 60% of a destroyer's capability. It was a masterclass in how to pay more for less. Then, there was the schedule, or rather, the complete lack of one. In a truly baffling decision, construction on the first ship, the USS Constellation, began long before the design was even finished. Think about that. The shipyard started welding steel together without a complete blueprint of what they were supposed to be building. By mid-2024, 2 years into construction, a government report found the ship's design was only 70% complete. This is like starting to bake a cake by just throwing ingredients in a bowl, while someone is still writing the recipe. Progress at the shipyard ground to a halt as workers waited for designers to figure out how all the new custom parts were supposed to fit together. The delivery date for the first ship, originally set for July 2026, was pushed back. And then, it was pushed back again. By late 2025, the Navy admitted the ship wouldn't be ready until April 2029, a full 36 months behind schedule. At that point, the lead ship was only 12% complete. 12%! After years of work and hundreds of millions of dollars, the shipyard had produced little more than a very expensive, partially assembled boat-shaped object. The Constellation-Class Frigate was no longer a ship. It was a monument to bad project management, a floating symbol of the Navy's inability to get out of its own way. It was, in short, a fiasco. Now, if you're thinking, surely, someone must have been held accountable for the previous shipbuilding disasters, well, you sweet naive summer child, this is government procurement we're talking about, a world where failure is often rewarded with a new title and a bigger office. One of the most stunning, almost darkly hilarious details of this whole saga is who was put in charge of the Constellation program. It was the very same management team that had overseen the troubled littoral combat ship program. Yes, you heard that right. The people who captained the LCS Titanic were handed the keys to the Navy's next big hope. This wasn't even hidden. The office in charge was simply renamed. In 2018, the Program Executive Office Littoral Combat Ship magically transformed into the Program Executive Office Unmanned and Small Combatants. They didn't even have to change the letterhead that much. This is the bureaucratic equivalent of a kid getting a bad report card, and his parents' solution is to just call it a good effort card and hope no one notices the failing grades. It sent a clear signal that the Navy wasn't interested in a real cultural change. It was just shuffling the deck chairs on a very, very expensive ship. This failure to reform the underlying process is the real heart of the problem. You can have the best parent design in the world, the most skilled shipbuilders, and an unlimited budget. But if the management culture is broken, the result will always be the same. The Constellation program wasn't the victim of a single bad decision, it was the victim of a systemic disease. The Navy's procurement system is built to encourage complexity. It rewards officers who champion more advanced, more capable, and therefore more risky technologies. There are few incentives for saying, no, this is good enough. Let's just build it. So, the same patterns of behavior that doomed the LCS were repeated almost perfectly. An over-reliance on unproven concepts, a constant shifting of requirements, a disconnect between the designers, the builders, and the warfighters. And a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between cost, complexity, and time. The Navy didn't just fail to learn the lessons of the past, it seemed to actively embrace them, like a man who, having been bitten by a snake, decides the best course of action is to go out and try to hug every snake he can find. The failure of the Constellation was preordained the moment the program was handed to the same office that had already proven it didn't know how to build a small, simple warship. By late 2025, the writing was on the wall, and the wall was 3 years behind schedule and billions of dollars over budget. The Constellation program was a mess. The lead ship was a ghost in a shipyard, barely more than a keel, and a collection of overdue invoices. The dream of a fleet of 20 or more frigates was dead. On November 25, 2025, the Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, finally did what many had been expecting for months: he canceled the program. It was a stunning admission of failure, a public acknowledgement that the Navy had once again sailed headlong into a procurement iceberg of its own making. The cancellation wasn't a clean break, however. Things in Washington are never that simple. The Navy announced it would still complete the first two ships, the USS Constellation and the USS Congress. The official reason was to keep the Fincantieri Marinette Marine shipyard from going under and to avoid paying massive contract termination fees. It was a decision born of necessity, not desire. The Navy was essentially forced to buy two vastly overpriced, incredibly late, and deeply flawed prototypes just to clean up the mess it had created. It's like ordering a pizza, having it arrive 3 hours late and completely burned, but you still have to pay for it because you don't want the pizza place to go out of business. The decision sent shockwaves through the defense industry and Congress. Billions of dollars had been spent with almost nothing to show for it. The Navy was now facing a massive capability gap. The older frigates had been retired, the literal combat ships were being decommissioned early, and the promised replacement was now officially a failure. The fleet was shrinking at the exact moment global threats were growing. The Constellation Fiasco wasn't just an accounting error, it was a strategic blunder that left the US Navy weaker and more vulnerable. It was a self-inflicted wound of staggering proportions. In the aftermath, the finger-pointing began in earnest. Shipyard executives blamed the Navy for the constant design changes. Navy officials blamed the shipyard for poor performance. Congress blamed everyone. But the truth was that the fault was systemic. The program was doomed from the moment the Navy decided its low-risk frigate needed to do everything a destroyer could do. And so, with billions of dollars vaporized and the industrial base in turmoil, the Navy was right back where it started, with a desperate need for a small, affordable warship, and absolutely no idea how to actually get one built. The Navy had to find a new plan, and fast. What do you do when your ambitious, high-tech frigate program implodes in a spectacular fashion? If you're the US Navy in late 2025, you do something truly unexpected. You look over at the US Coast Guard, the service known for rescuing fishermen and chasing drug smugglers, and say, "Hey, can we borrow your homework?" In a move dripping with irony, the Navy announced a new frigate program, imaginatively dubbed FFX, that would be based on the Coast Guard's Legend-class national security cutter. Yes, the replacement for the mini-destroyer that was too complex and expensive would be a militarized version of a boat designed to handle oil spills. This pivot was both a pragmatic solution and a humiliating climb-down. The Legend-class cutter, built by Huntington Ingalls Industries, has one huge advantage: it exists. It's a proven design with a warm production line, meaning the shipyard is already churning them out. This is exactly what the Constellation was supposed to be. By adopting the Coast Guard cutter, the Navy was finally, belatedly, embracing the original, simple, low-risk philosophy it had abandoned so spectacularly. It was a tacit admission that the Coast Guard, an organization with a fraction of the Navy's budget, was somehow better at buying ships. Of course, there's a catch. The new FFX frigate will be significantly less capable than even the original Constellation design, let alone the gold-plated version the Navy tried to build. It's a much smaller ship, weighing about 4,750 tons compared to the Constellation's bloated 7,291 tons. Its initial armament will be light, featuring a small 57mm gun and missiles for self-defense, but lacking the powerful sensors and long-range offensive punch of a true warship. The Navy plans to build these ships in flights, with later versions potentially getting more firepower. But for now, the Navy is essentially buying a patrol boat and calling it a frigate. The irony is almost too perfect. The Navy spent years and billions of dollars trying to turn a perfectly good frigate into a destroyer. When that failed, they were forced to cancel it, and to replace it, they are now taking a vessel that is not even a frigate and hoping to one day turn it into one. It's a complete reversal. They went from wanting too much capability to settling for almost none. It's like trying to build a custom Ferrari, failing miserably, and then announcing your new plan is to buy a fleet of golf carts, and maybe add a spoiler to them later. It solves the immediate problem of not having a vehicle, but it's a far cry from what you originally set out to achieve. So, what have we learned from this whole sad, expensive saga? The story of the Constellation-Class frigate is not really about one specific ship, it's a symptom of a much deeper, more persistent disease within the US Navy's procurement culture. It's a story about an institution that has forgotten a fundamental truth: less is often more. The desire to cram every possible capability into a single platform, to build the one perfect ship that can do everything, is a recipe for disaster. It leads to endless delays, bloated budgets, and, in the end, fewer ships for the sailors who need them. The core problem is a deep-seated aversion to accepting good enough. The Navy's culture rewards ambition and complexity. It's a system where adding one more requirement is always seen as a virtue, while advocating for simplicity is seen as a lack of vision. This is why the Navy could take the simple, brilliant idea of copying a European frigate and turn it into a multi-billion-dollar failure. They couldn't resist the urge to improve it, to customize it, to make it uniquely American, and in doing so, they destroyed everything that made it a good idea in the first place. The Constellation wasn't killed by foreign adversaries or shipyard mistakes. It was sunk by 1,000 well-intentioned PowerPoint slides in Pentagon meeting rooms. The pivot to the Coast Guard cutter is a desperate, last-minute attempt to learn this lesson. It's a forced return to sanity. The Navy is now betting that a large number of simple, available ships is better than a small number of complex, theoretical ones. This is the right idea, but it's a painful and expensive way to get there. The Navy has wasted nearly a decade and billions of dollars only to end up with a plan for a less capable ship than the one it could have started building back in 2020. It's a journey around the world just to end up back where you started, only with less money and a lot of angry taxpayers. Ultimately, until the Navy fixes its broken procurement system and changes the culture that drives it, this will happen again. There will be another LCS, another Zumwalt, and another Constellation. The names and classes of the ships will change, but the story will remain the same. A tale of soaring ambition, creeping requirements, and a final crashing return to reality. The US Navy needs to learn to love the boring, the simple, and the achievable. Because in the world of shipbuilding, the most advanced and capable warship is the one that actually gets built and delivered to the fleet. Everything else is just a fantasy.